So I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell two stories tonight. One happened not far from here at Vassar, which was an incident where I brought somebody today who's a very well-known influencer named Hen Mazik. And Hen was perfect. He was progressive, he was gay, he had one big fault, he was a Zionist. In the room, rushed in students for justice in Palestine, disrupted everything, put up posters of Palestinian terrorists. Hen tried to engage them, to have a discussion. That's not part of their MO, they don't like to do that. So afterwards, I wanted to talk to the kids on that campus, to ask them, what's going on here? I said, so how much anti-Zionism is here in Vassar? Now we're talking 10 years ago. And they said, oh, well, it's a lot. I said, where? They said, you could be in the cafeteria, your English lit professor could be shoving it down your throat. So I figured I'm talking to like right-wing kids there. And I said, what, I said, who are you? They said, we're J Street. We're the most right-wing group on campus, and our big sin is that we believe Israel has a right to exist. And this is 10 years ago. Before October 7th, the most lethal weapon to destroy Israel was used by JVP, Jewish Voice of Peace, and Students for Justice in Palestine. It is and was the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Movement, BDS. As Malcolm Hoenlein would say, it's the 21st century of anti-Semitism as opposed to the 20th century version, going after the collective Jew as opposed to the individual Jew. Unfortunately, we saw from October 8th on, going after the individual Jew seems not to be a problem. And the strongest predictor of anti-Jewish hostility on campus is the presence of BDS. The greater the BDS activity, especially among faculty, the more likely anti-Semitism gets on that campus. BDS is not about two states for two peoples. Why? Just listen to Omar Barghouti, who was the co-founder of BDS. He says, I want a Palestine next to a Palestine, not a Palestine next to an Israel. And BDS has been supportive of resistance, terrorism that's there. Now, I do want to point out one thing. I'll use this as a teaching moment. When I go to Congress, for years, I've made a special point because people very often will say two states. And for two states that they think, that means two states for two people. An Arab state and a Jewish state. By the way, I'm using the terms that the UN used in UN General Assembly Resolution 181 going back to 1947. But when I go to Ramallah and talk to the PA or PLO or Fatah, two states means one state, 100% Arab in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, and in Gaza, and the other state, a binational state in the 67 lines, which would have an unlimited right of return. In other words, the demographic destruction of Israel, two Arab states. So it's very important when you're saying it to say two states, two people, and people say, what do you mean? It's worth the explanation. So why does BDS resonate with our college kids? Israel was born in sin. I said it's a white colonialist settler project. It's against an indigenous people. Palestinians have been transformed into people of color. And Jewish students are told support for Israel is incompatible with social justice. So I'm just going to tell you another story. This happened after October 7th. I was speaking at many universities, many of them by Zoom. The kids in Boston University said, it's so bad here, we want you to come in person. I said, okay, but I said, you have to get me a room because I already have scheduled a Zoom with the kids in Duke. So they sent me up for a room in the Hillel, and I spoke, and after an hour and a half, I said, where can I speak, here in Hillel, where's my auditorium? And they said, well, you're not allowed to speak here at the Hillel and BU. I said, what are you talking about? We had to move you because the administration of BU said that they wanted this to be a safe space for any ethnicity or religion, and October 7th was too controversial, and they wouldn't host it. Give you an idea of what was going on in that first year after October 7th. It's mind-boggling. There is some light at the end of this tunnel here. In 2025, some universities started enforcing their rules, and actually campus protests have decreased, perhaps fearing government funding cuts. So what I want to discuss now is how we deal with anti-Semitism on a campus. So today, attempts to stop the pro-Hamas agitators on campus is called an infringement of their First Amendment rights to speak. Their right to call for a Jewish genocide from the river to the sea. And by the way, and you'll see it actually in the film, in Arabic, it's translated, which is not translated correctly, but here it is, from the water to the water, Palestine is Arab. And that's what's from the river to the sea. And also they call for or encourage terrorism. Globalize the Intifada is a call for violence. However, beyond that, what is not free speech, but unlawful actions, when there's trespassing, vandalism, blocking entrances, spitting on police, stopping traffic, disrupting commencement exercises, barricading yourself in a building, screaming down a speaker, or attacking someone, that's conduct, that's not speech. It's illegal conduct. It violates the rules of colleges, which go overall unenforced. An office that I speak at, although much more with security than anti-Semitism, is Senator Bill Cassidy's office, and he is the chair of the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. And last month, he said, regarding this issue, while college campuses should welcome free speech and the free exchange of ideas, they should not be havens for terrorist organizations to exert influence or investigate conflict for their own political purposes. And what they were investigating, big part, was AMP, American Muslims for Palestine, and their funding. So how can you fight anti-Semitism? First, to fight it, you have to define it. We need a working definition. There is a very good, not perfect, but a very good working definition called the IHRA definition, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition. For there to be enforcement and consequences, we need a definition that's accepted by governments, corporations, schools, organizations. So is there a difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism? Use the 3D test of Natan Sharansky. If you demonize, delegitimize, or have a double standard against Israel, that's anti-Semitism. So let's do this again. How do you know when anti-Israel rhetoric crosses over the line into anti-Semitism? If you claim that somebody has a dual loyalty, a Jewish person, that they're more loyal to Israel than they are to the United States, we saw that recently from Tucker Carlson, that is anti-Semitism. When you deny the Jewish people the right to have their own country, Zionism, that's an act of anti-Semitism. When you apply a standard against Israel that you have against no other country, that's anti-Semitism. A living embodiment of that is the United Nations. And if you compare Israel to Nazis, their policies, their leaders, you can criticize them. Israelis are the greatest at criticizing one another. But if you compare them to Nazis, that is anti-Semitism. So last week, there was an executive order that was issued requiring transparency. It was from a 1964 or 65 law that they want to enforce now, in foreign funding of universities that would address the horrific problem of Qatari and Chinese money at our universities. Over time, they have put into our universities $60 billion. I didn't say million, I said $60 billion. From 2021 to 2025, there's been $1 billion that have come from, we'll call them mystery donors, from offshore tax havens. And unfortunately, the last administration took off the rule that individuals had to be listed, and so it was only countries. So we couldn't know in those 4 years who was giving that $1 billion. So in regard to the administration's wanting to defund because of lack of defunding universities for lack of protection of Jewish students, I want to give the last word to Ruth Weiss, Professor Emerita of Harvard University. And she wrote this in the Wall Street Journal last week, and this will apply to any university. If Harvard shirks its responsibility to shore up the foundations of America and allows itself to be hijacked by an Islamist-inspired grievance coalition, why would it expect any financial support from the government? So these things are controversial, but I think she makes a good point. So I will stay around after the movie. And I'd be happy to answer questions. You're more than happy to follow me on Instagram or reach out to me. I do respond, and follow me on mepinanalysis.org. Victor?
Ready to roll?
Yeah, we're rolling.